On a dark night, with no stars and clouds gathering in the nearby sky as if they were about to fall to the ground, Adele arrived at the remote village, which no one had visited for years. Adele was a stranger to the village, wearing old but elegant clothes, and eyes that shone with terrifying curiosity. He walked quietly to the small village bar, where the villagers used to gather every evening to drink a little soup and exchange hushed conversations about legends and wandering spirits. The moment Adele entered, a heavy silence fell, as if the bar was suffocating from his presence. Everyone stopped talking, and eyes turned to him. Adele felt the place freeze, but he remained smiling calmly. He walked towards the bar and asked for a glass of water. Adele asked in a low voice, but with a tone that did not accept evasion, "I want to know the way to the old palace, the Palace of Shadows." As soon as the name was mentioned, the faces of those present changed from calm to panic, and some began to mumble soft prayers, while others retreated to dark corners. The innkeeper, an old man with disheveled white hair, stood with eyes gleaming with caution, and said in a tone tinged with fear, "What do you want from that place, stranger? Don't you know that everyone who entered it never returned?" Adele smiled, but his smile carried nothing but coldness. "It's my legacy, and here I am returning to reclaim it." His statement terrified the villagers. They whispered in trembling voices, "So he is the offspring of the curse. He came back to awaken the dead." But no one dared to stop him, and when he left the inn, silence followed him as if a ghost had passed by them. In the middle of the night, Adele stood in front of the palace. The wind was howling between the ancient trees, and the falling autumn leaves were swirling around him as if they were dancing a mad dance. The iron gate of the palace, bearing unclear drawings of demons and intertwined spirits, opened by itself with a creaking sound that made Adele's hair stand on end. Entering the palace. As soon as his feet stepped on the floor of the entrance, he felt the air change. He grew heavier, saturated with the smell of mold and dampness. He walked slowly, avoiding the scattered pieces of wood and broken glass. The main corridor led to a large hall. There, leaning paintings hung on the walls, bearing pictures of incomplete faces, as if they were torn from within the painting itself. With every step he took, he was met with low, but incomprehensible whispers, as if the walls were speaking a language from another world. As he passed by one of the paintings, he noticed that the eyes drawn on it were following him in slow motion. He raised his hand to make sure, but the painting returned to its fixed position, so he moved away, feeling the weight of those frightening eyes following him. He reached the large staircase leading to the second floor. On his right, there was a small door covered with rusty metal chains. He heard a faint sound coming from behind him, like the sound of a child crying. He stopped for a moment. He hesitated to open the door, but his curiosity got the better of him. He reached out and untied the chains with difficulty. The rust was scattered on the floor, forming red dust like dried blood. As soon as he opened the door, a wave of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the old smell of death. A narrow passageway leading to the basement appeared before him. There were small footprints on the floor, footprints stuck in old mud. He heard a sharp whisper, and then all the candles around him went out at once. Pitch darkness filled the place, and with it a feeling of an entity behind him. He turned slowly, and everything was pitch black. A soft but sharp voice whispered, "Why did you come back? Didn't anyone tell you that the heir should not return?" Adele turned towards the source of the voice, to see a shadow moving in the darkness. Its eyes were red, like an ember about to go out. The entity walked towards him, a wide smile filling its face. "You will become a part of this place, as everyone else has become." The cursed basement. With ragged breaths, Adele headed towards the basement. He knew that there was something waiting for him down below. Something that would change his fate forever. The dark stairs seemed endless, and the sounds of water drops falling from the ceiling were like the sounds of his racing heartbeat. He reached a vast, unnaturally cold basement. In the middle of the basement, a stone table stood in the darkness. On it, the decomposed body of a woman lay in a horrific position. Her bones were visible, and the remaining skin was stretched over her face like a mask. Hollow eyes were staring at him, as if waiting for him. This wasn't just a corpse, it was something much more terrifying, a living soul inside a dead body. Adele approached, holding onto the amulet he had inherited from his mother. He whispered incomprehensible words, like forgotten spells. Suddenly, the corpse began to move. It slowly raised its head, and the sound of bones rubbing together made Adele's blood freeze. "You're too late, my son," the corpse spoke in a hollow voice, continuing, "You should have come years ago, when it all began." Adele felt a chill run through his body. "Mother?" He said the word without realizing it. Yes, the corpse belonged to his mother, who had disappeared when he was a young child. His eyes watered, but he didn't back down. "We have cursed this place, we are your family, each of us is imprisoned here, until a new heir comes." The corpse stretched out its skeletal hands, trying to get closer to him. It muttered words that made the light in the basement disappear completely, and the shadows around him began to gather in the form of a strange entity. "You are the only one who can end this nightmare. Break the amulet, and free us all, or..." Before the corpse could finish, the entity rushed towards him. Adele tried to resist, but the shadows began to slowly envelop him, dragging him towards the table. At that moment, he heard his mother's voice, in its human form, calling from afar, "Leave now, before it's too late." But he knew that he couldn't leave. The decision was no longer in his hands. He looked at the amulet in his hand, raised it high, and then smashed it hard on the ground. Conclusion. A bright light emanated, flooding the entire basement. The entity screamed sharply, and the shadows faded into thin air. The corpse on the table disappeared, replaced by fine ash. Adele felt the place shaking, the walls crumbling. He ran towards the exit, the echo of voices chasing him. He reached the outer entrance, and jumped out before the entire palace collapsed behind him. He stood in the palace courtyard, catching his breath. Everything had returned to calm, and the air had become pure. But, when he looked at his hands, he saw that his fingers had become transparent. And his eyes. They were reflecting a picture of a face that wasn't his. He realized the horrific truth. He had become part of the curse, too. The palace reappeared behind him, as if it had never been destroyed. Only now. He would remain inside it, forever. When Adele looked at his reflection in the palace's cracked windows, he realized that the change that had happened to him wasn't just a strange sensation, it was real and tangible. His transparent hands were gradually turning into something like fog, as if parts of his body were slowly evaporating into the air. He couldn't control his limbs as he used to, he felt as if he was being pulled away from himself, as if his soul was being sucked into something bigger and deeper. He advanced towards the palace, this time not with his feet, but as if he was being pulled towards the iron gate that had silently opened again. With every step he took, he felt his memories fading away one by one. His mother's face, the echo of her voice, even the moment he broke the amulet, everything was sinking into the depths of oblivion. There was a huge, dusty mirror in the reception hall he had just returned to. He looked at it, and saw a strange face. It was no longer Adele, but a mixture of shadows and distorted faces. His limbs trembled, and his heart, if he had one anymore, beat violently. "You are now part of the palace," the voices around him whispered, creeping into his mind like spider webs. "You will never leave, you will stay here, with everyone." A series of images flashed before him, of many faces, men, women, children, all trapped inside the palace, souls lost in the cursed maze, searching for salvation, but without hope. Suddenly, the image of his mother appeared, her distorted face staring at him with her hollow eyes, extending her hands towards him as she had done before, but this time she was not asking him for mercy or salvation. She was asking for something else. "Free us, or join us forever." Adele trembled, but something inside him refused to give in. He focused all his remaining strength, trying to retrieve his memories, trying to remember how he came here, how his name was Adele, how he was someone with a past, but he failed. He only remembered scattered fragments, pieces of the mirror of his life that had shattered and melted throughout this palace. Then, in a rare moment of clarity, he remembered his last words, his angry whisper when he broke the amulet, "I will free you all." This promise was what remained to him, what preserved the remnants of his self that clung to existence. At that moment, all sounds disappeared, and the echo disappeared. Adele stood in the middle of the large hall, surrounded by the walls of the palace that began to glow with a dim light. There was an ancient writing, engraved on the walls, appearing little by little, as if responding to his will. Whoever defies the curse, must face every soul captured by the walls. This was the final challenge, the final confrontation. He wanted to be free, but he knew that would only happen if he faced all the spirits that had been trapped here throughout the ages. He knew that he had to stand firm, to prove that he was stronger than the darkness that consumed him. The spirits began to appear, first as shadows on the edges of the room, then as transparent bodies that made their way from the walls, as if emerging from nowhere. These were the faces he had seen in the mirror, and now, each face held an angry look, a deep hatred towards him. "Why didn't you save us?" whispered the ghost of an old man, his fingers twisted like the roots of a burnt tree, reaching towards him. "You were our last hope," screamed the ghost of a woman, shedding tears of black blood that evaporated on the floor. Then, the ghost of his mother appeared again. She approached him slowly, and whispered, "Adele. Either you save them, or you join them. The decision is yours." He felt despair creeping into his soul, but he refused to obey. He raised his hands, and closed his eyes. He muttered words he didn't understand, but they made him feel powerful. This was what was left of his mother, this was the last spell she said to him before she was locked in the palace, the only spell of hope. Suddenly, a circle of light erupted around him, the spirits retreated backwards, emitting sharp screams as if they were burning from the light that surrounded them. The ground shook, and the walls began to collapse. But Adele didn't stop. He kept repeating the words, his last memories were fading, but he continued. This time, he wasn't just freeing the spirits, he was freeing himself as well. His transparent body began to return to its original state, and his eyes that had lost their sparkle came back to life. With a final scream, the light exploded around him, spreading throughout the palace like a tornado of light. The spirits vanished one by one, and the walls of the palace cracked and shattered like glass shells falling into a sea of darkness. Adele found himself standing in the middle of the palace's ruins. There were no more spirits, no entity, and no curses. Everything was gone. The ground around him was covered in ash, the air was pure. There was only him, standing alone, in a place that had once been the center of all this horror. He didn't know how much time had passed, but when he looked up at the horizon, he saw the sun rise again. For the first time in years, he felt free. But as he turned to leave, he saw a small shadow standing at the doorway. It was the ghost of his mother, smiling softly. She walked up to him, extending her hand. He took her hand, but it was cold, transparent. She whispered to him with a sad smile, "You are free now, but I will not return with you. I will stay here, where I belong." He wanted to protest, to ask her to leave with him, but she turned away, fading into the sunlight. This was the end of the curse that had taken everything from him. But now, he, Adele, was back to being human.